Welcome to episode 230 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. I'm chatting today with a secondary teacher about how she uses class meetings as a powerful tool for creating a respectful, inclusive class culture, and how you can do the same no matter what grade level you teach. Visit truthforteachers.com to get an easy-to-read, easy-to-share version of this podcast episode. Planbook has been the established leader in online lesson planning since 2010, offering collaborative lesson sharing, flexible administrator access, and even student view tools for just $15 a year. Using Planbook, educators can build customized school years, classes, and lessons 100% online, directly inputting class materials and up-to-date standards from all over the world. Enter code TRUTH at sign-up to join over 800,000 Planbook teachers today and get your first year for only $5. This is my number one tool for lesson planning that I recommend to teachers in our 40-hour teacher workweek program, so highly recommend you sign up at planbook.com. Scholastic Scope is the easy way to keep your middle school ELA lessons fresh and engaging. All year long, your class receives news stories and resources in the format of your choice, print, digital, or both. Your students will love reading Scope's thrilling stories, discovering new genres, watching amazing videos, and writing about everything they've learned. And you'll love that every Scope story and activity builds core ELA skills, from summarizing to synthesizing. Visit scholastic.com/scope to learn more and use code 2021 to save 20%. Did you know it's possible to get a master's degree for under $8,000? Check out Midwest Teachers Institute. Their classes are developed by teachers, so they're practical and relevant, with both degree options and individual graduate courses for salary advancement and state recertification. Get an extra $25 off your first order by visiting MidwestTeachersInstitute.org/truth. That's MidwestTeachersInstitute.org/truth for an extra $25 off your first order. So in this episode, you're going to be listening in on my conversation with Jennifer Brinkmeyer. She has 14 years experience as a 7th through 12th grades English language arts educator. Her passion is building literacy supports that include all students, and she runs a website at freedreading.com, F-R-E-E-D reading.com. Jennifer is also a writer for the new Truth for Teachers collective. So as I mentioned in the previous episode, we're expanding Truth for Teachers beyond just the podcast and into additional articles and resources created by teachers who share my vision for creating a more just and compassionate world. So Jennifer is the first writer that you'll get to meet, with many more coming up in future episodes. So this first article that Jennifer wrote for Truth for Teachers is about classroom meetings, and I wanted to invite her on the podcast to talk about it now while everyone is thinking about community and relationship building during back to school. If you like what Jennifer shares here, go to truthforteachers.com and click on episode 230. She has a free downloadable resource that will help you set expectations and norms using class meetings. So truthforteachers.com, episode 230, and you can download that resource. Jennifer is a high school teacher, but her process, as you will soon hear, is adaptable for almost any classroom. And I give a couple elementary examples from my own experience as we talk. Here's Jennifer talking about how she got started with class meetings and whose work inspired her practice.
So I first heard about this idea when I had a 3-year-old daughter. She's older now, but I asked my childcare provider for a resource for, understanding the 3-year-old mind. And she recommended a book called Positive Discipline by Jane Nelson and Lynn Lott. And as I read it, I thought, this would totally work with my high schoolers. I can't believe it. So I picked up, there's Positive Discipline in the Classroom. And so that's where I first heard about the idea of the classroom meeting. But as I'm talking today, if listeners are familiar with restorative circle training or Dr. Chris Emden's cogenerative dialogue, you'll see kind of hints of that in the work as well. So my ideas really come from a fusion of a lot of other people's. So how I approach classroom meetings is first, the purpose is primarily to resolve conflicts in the classroom and to build community. They are regularly scheduled meetings. So I believe Nelson and Lott recommended weekly, but I think it would depend how long your class periods are, how often you see your kids age, everything like that. Students sit in a circle or facing each other, and a talking piece is passed so that way everyone has the opportunity to speak, but passing is allowed. So in my room, it's a stuffed monkey, and so kids can pass the monkey if they don't want to contribute, but they always have the opportunity. And then finally, students can submit topics. So as the year goes on, if students see conflicts that arise in the classroom, they can submit ideas as well. So it really becomes a collective space that is co-owned by everyone in the classroom.
How do class meetings help you build community and relationships?
So first, I think just because you are protecting a space for people to know and be known, that inherently is going to create community because you are taking time just to face each other and speak human to human, where you're not just focusing solely on content or covering curriculum or anything like that. Solving actual conflicts together also builds authentic community, because if your community is never encountering and engaging conflict, you're not really building community. You're just kind of playing nice together. But on days where we don't have a conflict to resolve, which certainly happens, like we didn't have a conflict every week, we would reserve the meetings for class community building. And so sometimes those were shorter activities like this or that, peanut butter or chocolate, cats or dogs, little things like that. Or, we didn't have time for a full meeting. We could do those little things. But we also use the idea of the fire pit, which I first heard from Liz Prather, who wrote Project-Based Writing. And I'm an English teacher historically. And so in the fire pit, it works very similarly to how people tell stories at an actual fire pit or a campfire, where you bring a topic, like maybe it's snowing outside your classroom that day, and you just say, does anybody have a good snow story? And so this one, we might not pass around a monkey and make everyone, kind of pass on sharing a snow story, but this would be more popcorn style. So I'd have like a little foam ball and someone says, I got a snow story. You throw them the ball, they share their snow story. And then someone else will say, you know what? My family used to go sledding there too. I have a story. And then they throw the ball to that person. And so there's this more organic mix of storytelling, which really, knits people together. Like we are communities of storytellers. And of course, this is pure gold for English teachers out there. If you've got a narrative unit coming up, get some fire pits going. And then when kiddo is stuck, you say, oh, what about that skateboard story you told the other day in fire pit? That would be such a great narrative. So you can kind of pull it into content a little bit. But that's how I use it to build community.
So how is this fitting into your daily schedule or into your weekly schedule? How often is it happening and how long are you spending on it?
I usually did Fridays. I liked ending the week that way, especially with the building community piece. It just kind of was nice to bring people together. They're about 15 to 20 minutes in length. You don't want to belabor the point too much, and there's other things to do.
And how do you use class meetings to help set expectations and norms?
So one of the troubles I ran into was that you can go authoritarian with your setting expectations and say, here are the rules. I'm going to be super clear about what I expect in my classroom because I don't want there to be confusion with students, which works to a certain degree, but it's nice to have more collaborative ownership. Of course, teachers, we're the holders of the power in the room. So like, how do you do that? So the other approach is to say, okay, let's develop it all together. In my experience, for me, it became too permissive because then I was enforcing like 5 different periods, classroom expectations, and the kids were mostly like, oh, we'll just respect each other. It'll be fine. And I, as like an expert, know that it's not going to be fine. People are going to get out their phones. Well, the kids are going to make a phone policy, and phones are a pet peeve. Like I cannot pretend to be chill about phones if I am not chill about phones, right? Like the kids, it will eventually catch up with the kids where they'll be like, okay, she didn't say anything at the beginning and now she's mad at us. And so she's just a phony. So I really love the classroom meeting as a happy middle where I can decide what are my big issues. Like I can't get into everything with kids, but what do I care about? And I can be super honest with that, but we can also build something together. So for me, my areas were technology, attendance, and inclusion, but it might be different depending on the age and, just you have to know yourself and just own what matters to you. And then for our class meetings, we set about at the start of the year creating a class guide. And that guide then becomes something I can send to parents. Like, here are the things we've talked about as a class. Here's what we've agreed to. And there can be, kind of different periods can have different guides. And it's okay because I'm still enforcing the same expectations across a whole school day. So it's a little more manageable on my end. It becomes a great third point if I want to meet with a student and we need to solve a problem. Well, let's look at what's in the guide. So it's not necessarily coming from me to them and it feels oppositional. It's more, let's look at the map together and let's figure out a way through this in your best interest. So when we have these meetings, we go through these different topics and I ask a series of questions. So for example, unexcused absences is something I want to talk about. So the first question stem I might ask is, what are the effects of students getting unexcused absences? And I'll pass my monkey. The students will go around and they'll say, so what happens when students get unexcused absences? When the monkey gets back to me, I can then say anything else that maybe the students haven't thought of. So sometimes students don't even know, like, what are the effects? Like, do you know that after 7 UAs, you will be dropped from class? Like, even at 11th grade, sometimes they have no idea that, like, the effect is you will not get credit for this class. And then, then you're credit deficient and that can put you behind for graduation. So I use my moment with the talking piece to include any information kids might not know. So after we've gone over what are the effects, which gets at rationale, like why does Ms. Brinkmeyer even care about this particular issue, we get into why do students. So then I might say, why might students have unexcused absences? And the kids tend to start pretty puritanical. They're like, oh, well, kids, they're lazy. They don't want to go to class, blah, 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 blah. And so I let them do that little rant. And then when the monkey gets back to me, I can paraphrase, say back to the students what I heard them say. And then I can trouble the waters a little bit. Well, what if a student has an assignment due next hour and maybe why might they skip this class so they can get that assignment done? What are some other reasons? And kind of push them into some other thinking. Oh, what about students whose parents don't know the process for calling a student in, or they think the student should be in class, so they're not going to call them in. Or maybe a student wants to see a friend. They have different lunch blocks. So they say, well, we'll get together during third hour instead of going to class and check in with each other. So to really open up their thinking. And now, obviously, I think at different ages can handle different amounts of ambiguity with that. But at the high school level, their decision making is rarely black and white. So there's that negative consequence of the UA, but that has to be balanced with, well, I need to connect with my friend. My friend's going through a really tough time, or I've got this major assignment due for this other class. Like, I'm making trades. And so it's important to start to cultivate that in them, the sense of how do I maximize the benefits and minimize the drawbacks of a particular issue. So then the third question we can go into, well, how could students solve these particular reasons? So a student who wants to see their friend during class, what could they do instead? A student who's gotten behind on assignment, what could they do instead? That would be, more of a pro-social, get you in class kind of solution. Also getting away from those schoolish answers just welcomes, like, I am not fighting with reality. Like, I am here and I see your reality and it's okay. And so if there's an issue you're having that doesn't have a very obvious, like, we'll just go to class solution, we can actually talk through some of those nuances. We also use the guide as we build it around whatever our major issues are. to talk about disrupting school policies. So sometimes a student might be so for example, in the unexcused absence example, maybe both their parents are at work during that time and are not able to use their phone. Okay, well, this policy is hitting this kid harder than it would hit a kid whose parents are able to make a call at 8 in the morning or whatever. So now the kid might say, okay, well, that policy is bogus, so I'm just going to rack up the UAs, whatever. Well, that ends up harming the student ultimately. So the student needs another way to disrupt the policy. So can the student go to administration and say, so here's how this policy is problematic, how it's hitting systemically, and they can have those conversations, but teenagers don't really know kids don't really always know how to do that, right?
Yeah, we have to teach them how to advocate for themselves. I love that.
Yeah, so sometimes it's even a protest. We had a group of sixth grade girls who, if you wore spaghetti straps to school, you had to go home. And so these girls arranged, we're all going to wear spaghetti straps on the same day. And you know what they're not going to do? Send the entire sixth grade female class home, right? So they were able to change a policy because they knew how to disrupt it with peaceful protest. So it's an opportunity to share with students how to do that. So this guide building really could take a long time if you're tracking. Like, that's a lot of big questions. And that's okay. If the guide is to be used, it can take multiple classroom meetings to build it. And then you're actually referring to it during the school year, like that's what you want. It shouldn't be something that you made in, August, September, and then nobody ever looked at it again. I do also share very plainly in positive language what I expect for students. So for example, please put your phone away for the duration of class and include yourself in the lesson. Something like that. And that becomes the phrase that's posted, and it becomes the phrase I say whenever a student is, needing a reminder. And what's nice about that is I'm able to detach. I'm not coming up with some passive aggressive or trying to be funny, but it's really not funny. Like, what does she really want? I'm just like, this is the phrase I say. And she says it to everybody. The kids know, like, Miss Brinkmeyer, she's always saying that to us. She'll say it to anybody in class. Nobody's getting called out. And they know what I expect. And it just lets me emotionally detach, especially when I'm saying it for like the 8th time in 3 days, right? Like, here's the thing I say. And then I also share with them my promises to them. So I promise to always provide engaging lessons, positive recognition, clear rationale, problem-solving guidance. And if I'm defaulting on those fundamentals, then I don't really have a leg to stand on if I come about their behavior, right? So I can check in and say, have my lessons been engaging lately? Have you received positive recognition from me? Like, am I holding up my end of this bargain? And so that's also my way of getting at what I will do for them.
So when you are going through these expectations, what I heard, and tell me if I'm hearing this and recalling this correctly, there's basically 3 rounds of questions. The first has to do with what are the impacts of this thing? Like, what's the impact of having your phone out in class, or the impact of unexcused absences? And they each go through, if they want to, you pass the stuffed monkey, and then you get to the end and you talk about norms and expectations. The second pass has to do with why students do those behaviors. And then the third has to do with what are alternatives. So they're brainstorming different ways to sort of meet those needs that don't have those negative outcomes. Is that right?
Yes. Yep, that's exactly it.
So how does this work then at the beginning of the year, when you mentioned like you're really particular about the technology use, about the unexcused absences, and what was the third thing?
Inclusion. So that's like my respectful
including
umbrella.
Everyone. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So those are your 3 things that are like very important to you and you want to get across to kids. How would that work then if you're only doing these meetings on Fridays? Are you doing more of this at the beginning of the year?
You mean to build the full guide?
Yes.
So sometimes what we'll do is we can start in smaller groups and then come back together into a full group.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't take quite as long. So again, that depends probably on the age of your students and how many things you want them to talk about and all of that. So I can assign small groups. You all are going to work through these 3 questions on technology, and then bring what you had back to the group, and then we'll do a full class meeting. So that is one way I've helped shave down how long that could take to build. So I am able to introduce my expectations, and then we can build the guide and keep adding to it as we go throughout the year.
Is the guide actually written down someplace?
Yes, yeah, I am recording on a Google Doc as students are talking during the class meeting, and then
Okay.
I'm able to share that. I can share it with students, I can send it home with parents, I can include resources for parents that, so here's how you call in, your student if they're absent. So things that parents might need to be made aware of.
So it's a working document. You're saying don't rush it. It's something that's going to be built all throughout the year and added to. And then you use that basically as problems arise throughout the year to help problem solve, correct?
Yes, and you can add as scenarios come up as students find new and creative ways, just new and creative problems, and
Yes.
that's really the fundamental part of this is that anything that's happening, it is a problem to be solved by us together. You are
Yes.
not the problem. I am not the problem. The problem is outside both of us, and we are facing it together.
So, can you walk us through an example of how to plan a class meeting to solve a problem? So, let's say you're a couple months into the school year and this new thing that is not currently in the guide has come up. What might you do and say there?
Yes. So a big one for me that would come up is talking during independent writing time. And you have the students who are, they're typing away, they're trying to focus. And then you have other students who are just chit chatting, write a little, chat a little, right? And so to prepare for class meeting on this topic, what I'm going to do is gather some numbers. A lot of this works better. I think sometimes as teachers will say, everybody was talking yesterday. Well, was everybody really? Or was it like 3
Mm.
very loud kids? So like, let's make sure numbers are a lot harder for kids to argue with because when you just say everybody, well, they know you're being biased because it wasn't truly everybody. Like they were
Right.
there, they know. So I'll do like a running record. Maybe I check every 10 minutes and I look around. I'm going to count. Okay, there are 8 kids talking right now. Okay, now there's 12 kids talking. So, and then I can also look, okay, I'm going to go into their Google Docs and see how much work happened yesterday. Okay, the average kid wrote about a paragraph. Okay, so now we know you had 40 minutes to work. You wrote a paragraph in that time, and here's how many people were talking. So I can open the meeting. Here are the numbers. Here's what I saw yesterday. I'm not going to shame anyone. I'm just going to say, here's what I saw. Um, what might be the effects of this? And then let them go around. I can paraphrase anything else, ask for anything else, or, what about if there are some scenarios they haven't considered. Um, and then I'll say, why might students have been talking yesterday? And they're going to come up with some legitimate reasons. I was stuck and I trust my friend to give me good feedback. I didn't know what to do, so I talked instead. They'll have ideas for that.
Hmm.
And so once we've got a variety of, kind of positive and negative reasons for why we might have been talking yesterday, then we can go into what are some of the ways we could preserve, the benefits of being able to get feedback from a classmate, yeah, but minimize the drawbacks so that everyone's included in class, because some people need that silent work environment. And so like you're
Mm.
it's like an inherent opposition, right? Like it can't be
Hmm.
silent and there's talking. There's only one way it can happen. So then they have to solve together. So in this particular example, the students decided if you wanted to talk with a peer, you would sit in the hall and work. And if you wanted it silent, you would stay in the room. So that the kids who wanted it silent, they would stay in the room. The talkers went in the hall. Some of the talkers realized that maybe that still wasn't a great choice for them when they
Hmm.
were not getting much work done, but they had the option, and so you have to treat it like it's a learning experience. They're not going to execute everything perfectly. Like we're practicing these skills, we're learning how to solve complex problems, and getting distracted from your work, that is a life thing, like you're
Yes,
going to be dealing with that issue your entire life,
that's
and make
right.
and am I making the right choice for myself right now? Maybe, maybe not, so it's a good practice.
Is there ever a time during this process where kids may want to circle back? So, like, I'm imagining, um, you've got, let's say you've got 30 kids in the room, and the 25th kid says something, and kids number 5 and 6 who already had a turn have something, they feel some kind of way about what was just said and they want to add something. How do you handle that kind of situation? Does each person just get their one shot to contribute to that question?
I always, when after I've asked a question, we've gone around once, I say anything else, or does anyone want to speak about what someone else just said? So, and then
Okay.
I'll pass it again. So there's usually fewer kids on the second round, but yeah, you definitely want to give them the opportunity to speak back. So it's more of a dialogue than, just everyone saying their one thing.
Yes. Okay. All right. I'm loving this, Jennifer. I think this is great. So, okay, so we're getting to the point in the school year now where kids are talking during independent work. That's going to happen in the classroom of literally every person listening to
Right. Definitely.
this is going to happen to them. So you're saying rather than lecture, rather than blow up on them, rather than lose your temper, rather than nag them, rather than repeat yourself 1,000 times, you're starting to notice, okay, this is becoming a growing problem. Let me start collecting some data about that and some evidence to support my frustration here. And then on Friday morning, that's when I'm going to sit down and talk to them about it and show them what I notice. And then we'll ask these questions.
Yes, and kind of having that set aside space, um, it's just so proactive, right? Because you don't have to fix it right now. You can hold
Yes.
on, you can gather the information, because chances are in the moment you're not. But if we have a space that's already protected, a container for that conversation, the kids also know, like, this meeting isn't just being called because now she's mad at us. Like, we
Right.
always have this meeting on Fridays, and sometimes we talk about, chocolate and peanut butter, and sometimes we talk about stuff that's not working. So it becomes a great space. It also works for, we get into a certain unit and a student is frustrated and it's like, I don't get why we have to learn this is so dumb. And I said, that's a great topic to bring to class meeting, right?
Yes.
Instead of being overly defensive or in the moment, which is not, it's just not going to register with the kid, like, bring it to class meeting. Let's talk about what's working, what's not working. It's an opportunity for me to improve my practice.
Mm-hmm.
We can have some ground rules about how that conversation can go so that we're, still respectful of people. But, let's provide a space for it. Let me grow, let you guys grow together. You're not the only one struggling. I mean, if you're brave enough to say it, let's find a constructive way to resolve this conflict instead of, just complaining, muttering under our breath or whatever.
How does this class meeting block look in your lesson plans in terms of documentation? I'm thinking about the teachers who need to account for every minute of how they use their class time and prove that everything ties back to academic learning goals. What does this look like in terms of your lessons?
As an English teacher, I can tie it to speaking and listening, right?
Yes, that's what I did as a third grade teacher. Yep, oral
Yeah,
language. We have oral language
yeah.
goals. Let's do it.
And that's a literacy standard that exists for also, social studies, science, that sort of. So, I mean, we've
Right.
got core literacy in the content areas. So yeah. And if there is a concern about the time, you can have a shorter meeting. You can, whatever you need to do to pass muster, I guess.
Yeah, maybe a shorter meeting. Also, I wonder if you could throw in an academic question, at the
Hmm.
end, or like, or say, or maybe start off with, let's talk about the most, how did you feel about this particular topic? What were the big ahas that came
Hmm.
about? If you're a social studies teacher and you were exploring this particular essential question, what was the thing that surprised you most from this unit, or maybe tie something in? So
Yeah.
I just want to kind of toss that out there because that's um, there's two main pieces of pushback that I hear from teachers who don't want to do class meetings. The first has to do with not knowing how to make it a really valuable use of time and make sure that it's structured and not just like kids venting and yelling at each other. And I think you've really outlined a really clear and easily replicable system here that could work for any grade level. So I think we've got that part covered. And so I just want to address that other piece, which is, I don't have time for it. And my administrator wouldn't like it. I think you need to find a way to make this work for your situation because it is so essential. And I think you would agree, Jennifer, that like saying like, this is not one more thing to add to the plate. This is the plate. This is the thing that makes everything else you do in your classroom possible, because you're not stopping your lesson every time there's a problem. You don't have to keep stopping to like, oh, here's this interpersonal conflict. Okay. You can just say, you know what, this thing keeps coming up between kids and they're arguing over this thing all the time. We'll talk about it at a meeting.
Right.
What can teachers do to keep up the energy and the engagement in class meetings throughout the year so that it feels fresh and it's something that kids really enjoy participating in?
Great question. So first, I mean, we can have a meeting about the meeting.
Very meta. I love it.
Right? Ask the kids, okay, we've been doing this for a while. I'm starting to notice that during class meeting, everyone's like wiggling, looking around, peeking at their phones. What can we do to keep this interesting? What would be fun? Like, especially, I just love that turning point in the year where the community does start to be built and kids are like, you know what? Could we do like karaoke classroom meeting? And we're just going to put up some karaoke YouTube and we're just going to sing. I had that happen in a class one time and it was so lovely. But, you know, like, let's think outside the box. Let's make it fun. Another way is to increase the challenge. So we're doing these whole class versions, but could we have students now start to lead and facilitate and ask those questions, student leaders, or divide the class in like half and half, and you're each going to run a meeting on a topic. Or maybe you're getting ready for like a heavy small group unit or a lit circle unit. This week's classroom meeting is going to be about your small group or your lit circle, and you guys are going to have a productive meeting about what's working, what's not working in your group, and talk about a life skill, right?
Oh, that's so good. Jennifer, I am so grateful that you shared all of this practical information with us. I feel like I can really envision exactly what this will look like. And I'm wondering if you can share something that you wish every teacher understood about class meetings.
So teachers inherently have power in the classroom, and they can use some of it to amplify what's essential, but they can redistribute the rest of it in a way that teaches students to be members and leaders in communities for a lifetime. Classroom meetings are one blueprint for all future relational work. You will be calling classroom meetings, quote unquote, your whole life, right? With your roommates, with your friends, with your spouses, with your family, with your own kids, with your colleagues. And so having that practice of actually engaging with the people that you're surrounded by, that's just good practice.